Well, I think that you could say the fact that they need to sing it means that they've begun to, the fact that it has to come externally means that Orestes doesn't feel as though he's doing it to himself. He feels as though it's coming from the outside. The interesting thing, I mean, so many people have seen this, Nietzsche saw this big difference between what he calls Apollinian art and Dionysian art, is that Dionysian art is akin to music. And if you think about the difference between visual art and music, it's quite clear that there's a crucial distinction between the person perceiving the art and the object of art. If the painting is hanging on the wall, it can pull you in, but the thing about music is it's already in. There is no music unless it's somehow surging through you. That's why the sort of linguistic connection between musical mode, let's just say, keep it simple, major and minor modes on the one hand, and mood. Mode and mood are really just the same word. And it's not an accident that a minor mode throws you into a certain kind of mood, or you choose a certain kind of song because you're already in a certain kind of mood. There's something more internal about music. It runs through you in a way that it's much more difficult for visual art, which is always an object in some way separate from you in a way in which music can't be. It's important that it's a song, but then having just said what, Nietzsche makes a distinction between Apollinian art and Dionysian art, and Apollinian art is more connected to the classic arts, music on the one, sculpture and painting on the one hand, and Dionysian art with, ultimately with music. But then it turns out that Nietzsche wants to say, well, I've chosen these two gods because one is the god of drunkenness and revelry, and the other one is the god of light and form and order and so on. So it looks as though there's this fundamental distinction between the two. And yet, by giving Dionysian art a name and identifying it, and that name actually turns out to be one of the 12 Olympian gods, if the youngest and the most, the strangest, you could say, Dionysus, still an Olympian god. And in the book that Nietzsche writes about this in, he makes it clear that the Olympian gods are the greatest creation, the greatest invention of Apollinian art. So the very characterizing, the typing of a certain kind of art as Dionysian has already made it sort of Apollinian. Now, what does that mean? That's just what I was talking about earlier when this question of the mother came up. The difference between your feeling for your mother, inescapable, whether you love her or hate her or both or what, but it's your mother. The minute you make it a principle, thou shalt honor thy father and mother, well then it's the mother. And what was previously, you could say, Dionysian has turned into something Apollinian. So I think that the binding song is something like that. It's meant to be a song. It's meant to get inside Orestes. It's meant to be something like the feeling of guilt that consumes you when you've done something that you think is wrong, on the one hand. And on the other hand, the fact that it comes from the outside, the fact that they have to sing it, the fact that they know that they have to sort of capture him with it, bind him with it, means that it's already a lost cause. It's already, quote, to use a Nietzschean distinction, Apollinian. It's not Dionysian because nothing that you can point to in this way outside is Dionysian, although certain things like the Furies and the binding song have a Dionysian element. There's something in them that is meant to point to that. Okay, so let me try to bring some things together. So we want to finish it for today's Wednesday, right? So for next Monday. The Furies, and this is back to Rachel's question. The Furies are divine agents of decay, of justice, of right, of punishment. It could mean any of those things. But prior to Aeschylus, they only appear as likenesses, decaying, in the manner of, like, just as, like gorgons, like snakes. Now, this has something to do with the fact that they are, at line 416, they call themselves daughters of night. They're dreams. That's what an offspring of night is. Clytemnestra comes to them as a dream in order to be their fury. So the Eumenides is the story of what it means to externalize them, give them a being of their own. It's the story of a dream come true. At the same time, the Oresteia as a whole, and in particular the Eumenides, the trilogy as a whole is about old female versus new male gods. So the appeal to Gaia, the mother of all mothers, by the prophetess, is an attempt to cover up the war among the gods. So she attempts to, contrary to the standard understanding, to imply that Apollo got the oracle at Delphi peacefully as a matter of course. It's almost growth that she's describing, this a growth with no obstacles, sort of put a seed in the ground and it grows up peacefully and without any conflict. Now, the appeal to the female is throughout an appeal to nature. The Furies are guilty in the Parados because they haven't lived up to their nature as Furies. Agamemnon, we're told, acted contrary to his nature as father when he killed his daughter. Orestes acted contrary to his nature as son when he killed his mother. But Agamemnon was not a husband by nature. So Clytemnestra didn't act contrary to her nature when she killed him. So Orestes moves from being a source of bitterness to Clytemnestra to being a source of bitterness to all parents. That's on line 240. You can see that as, not line 240, but page 240, line 511. You see that especially, we get this. O throne of the Erinyes, thus I think shall a father or a mother, newly smitten, make lament because the house of justice is falling. Even had we not seen the way his crime gets generalized to murder, this would be enough to mark a crucial change. It's a universalizing of the principle of natural ties. To repeat what I said earlier, it's not I love my mother, it's thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother. But then this law, honor the mother, would become the true bond of the family and not the nature that it's supposed to describe. So you could say law only exists when it's possible to disobey it. That's why you got to be, when you're, some of you, maybe most of you will eventually be parents, be very, very careful what you tell your children not to do, because you run the risk of introducing to them the possibility that they might do it, which they wouldn't have thought of if you hadn't said, no, don't do that. The law always presents itself as the way things are, but in fact, it only arises because of the possibility that things are not that way. So the interesting thing about honor thy mother is it's very different in form from I love my mother. It's an injunction. It's something you ought to do, which announces to you simultaneously the possibility that you might not do it. So if the law now becomes the reason for obedience, then the natural ground for the law, which is the relation between mother and child here, has been replaced already. You've been told there's a law, there's an injunction. This is what you, so that's what's telling you to love your mother. It's not that, oh yes, of course, I love my mother. So as nature gets legalized in the Oresteia, the female principle gets masculinized. And so you get Clytemnestra, the manly woman, and you get Athena, the woman who's born only of men, of a man. Now, prior to the existence of law, the Furies are themselves in a peculiar position. So the structure of the binding song implies that they are in some way caught between freedom and necessity. It's their nature, their lot, and the word comes up constantly, laches, or fate, moira. They're born to their role. That's in the first strophe. But then in the second refrain, they also claim to choose their role. So what does that mean? We noticed that the binding song was itself meant as the punishment inflicted on those it bound. The real punishment isn't the punishment that's threatened, but the endlessly repeated threat in the form of a song. But this is to say that guilt is essentially self-imposed. It's free punishment according to which you do to yourself what seems necessary given your nature. You feel as though you can't escape it, but you feel as though you can't escape it. So somehow you impose it on yourself because of your understanding of your own nature. I'll put the whole thing slightly differently. The fact that Apollo says the Furies would be welcomed by barbarian people, remember back in line 185 following, and lions, line 192, means that there are some who would not be repulsed by them. But of course, this implies they would have no power, since their power is to be repulsive. So the Furies are feared only where there is a sense of shame at doing certain things. If they were at home, if they were domesticated, if they fit in, they would disappear. And accordingly, we're told, line 249, they range over the whole earth. They don't have a home. They can't have a place, a lot. Greek has the same double entendre that we have in English. The lot, one's lot is in a way one's fate, and it's also what you build your house on. So when Athena offers them a place, she has in effect offered to make guilt respectable, make guilt honored, but somehow without destroying its power. That's the puzzle of the whole play. Can guilt be pushed into a place of honor without destroying it? Because you'd think, my God, guilt is terrible. I want to avoid it at all costs. You don't think that you're not proud of the fact that Athens is the home of guilt. So when she finally offers them a place, when they accept her offers, she gives them, is line 260, line 898 through 91, she offers them gamaros, which is a compound of Gaia and moron, or moros, you could say, a part of the earth, a place of ground. So a lot, you could say, of earth. They're going to accept her offer, and it's important for us to figure out what that means, what exactly that means. Okay, so Athena finally enters, line 397 through 314. We get a lot of talk about her land, her place, which means both Athens, on line 406, it's called her earth, her ktonos, and her lot, her lachos, at Troy. Now, they have just finished, we saw last time, calling attention, if you look at the translation changes I made last time at page 228, 230, and 231, they have just finished calling attention to their lot, to their lache. She comes in wearing the aegis, that is the shield that Athena has that bears the severed head of the Gorgon Medusa. They, of course, have been repeatedly likened to Gorgons, so they see a certain kinship with her. But she doesn't recognize them at all. It's worth looking at page 234 to see how clear that is, that she doesn't know who they are. And as I look on this company, new to the land, I feel no fear, but wonder sits upon my eyes. Who are you? I speak to all in common. So she doesn't have any idea who these creatures are. She also doesn't recognize Orestes. They then address her, and she questions them. If you look at 234 at the bottom, you shall learn all briefly, daughter of Zeus. Remember back to Libation Bearers 949 on page 168, where this is given as the etymology of Dike, the daughter of Zeus, Diakoros. So how do they know who she is? They haven't seen her either. Well, the statue, there's a statue in the temple, wooden statue that Orestes has his arms wrapped around. So do they recognize Dike from a likeness, a Dikane? Or, well, they know they're in Athens and she's the only god there. So this is her place, so they know her from her place. Anyway, the goddesses without a father, they're the daughters of night, introduce themselves to the goddess without a mother. Now, we are told at 238, page 238, it's line 415. Have I got that right? Yeah. Hold on, I think I got it right. No, it's 235, I think I want. Yeah. Right after the passage about daughter of Zeus. You shall learn all briefly, daughter of Zeus, for we are the eternal children of night, and change this. We are called curses in our home below the earth. So they identify themselves, they say they are the daughters of night. They're called curses. So by making a distinction between what they are and what they seem to human beings, they open up the possibility that existing in their own right and not as called up by men as curses, they could exist as other than curses. And therefore they claim as their office, as their honor here, not pursuing matricides, but those who have killed anybody they drive out of their homes. This is where we're told that, where they tell us that they simply pursue murderers, anyone who has killed anyone else. What do they say about matricide? They say the very doing of it is unjust. The motive to kill the mother is unjust. On 235, yes, he thought it right to become his mother's murderer. And then Athena says, was there no other constraint that made him go in fear of wrath? And they say, why, what spur is there so keen as to drive to matricide? So there's nothing that could justify killing the mother. They're creatures of seeming for whom the seeming is the reality. And therefore, Athena says, don't they make a distinction between being called right and being right? That's on the following page, on 236. You wish to be, change the text, reputed to be just rather than to so act. Now, accordingly, they assume Orestes won't swear an oath because for them, to swear righteously is to be right. They don't understand that Orestes could grasp Athena's statue, trust in right, without knowing that he acted rightly. Or you could say they don't yet see the possibility of separating the content of right from the form of right. That is, they don't yet see the possibility of the jury system. So on 236, we get this. Would you commit to me the settlement of the charge, of the guilt, of the idea? Surely we reverence you as worthy and of worthies. So are they intrigued? They seem to do it on the basis of her parentage, that once again, that they'll trust her because of her genealogy. So at this point, Athena turns to Orestes. She mentions Ixion. It's a very strange example. Ixion killed his father-in-law, the father of his wife, Dia, the accusative for Zeus, if it makes a difference. He killed his father-in-law and was refused purification by human beings. So Zeus took pity on him and brought him up to Mount Olympus, where Ixion promptly tried to seduce Hera. As punishment, Zeus put him on a wheel in Hades and tortured him forever. So Athena's example seems to suggest that Orestes is actually guilty, if he has anything in common with Ixion. Orestes, in reply, says, I'm really not like Ixion. I've been purified everywhere I've gone. I'm from Argos, I'm Agamemnon's son. In other words, I'm the source, or my father was the source of the lot you just received when you were off in Troy. My mother killed him. Apollo told me I would suffer if I didn't kill her, so I did it. You judge. So he asks her. She doesn't ask him the way she had for the Furies. Athena then says, this is too tough for mortals. This is too tough for mortals to judge. In other words, Clytemnestra had to be wrong to judge on her own, and Orestes is correct. And I, a goddess, can't even judge. Therefore, Apollo is not justified in what he did, and so the Furies are correct. So she states the problem very clearly on page 238, line 472. The matter is harder than any mortal thinks to judge of. It is not right, themis, a divine kind of right, even for me to decide a trial, a dikos, for murder that brings down sharp or fierce wrath, all the more since, disciplined as you have come a suppliant, pure and harmless, to my house, and in spite of all, the city has no reproach against you, and I adopt you. So, who can judge when wrath is sharp? And then before the Furies ever make the threat themselves, she says that if they lose, they will infect the earth, the place. We don't quite know what she means. The second Stasimon seems to be the answer to what she means. And the creation of a jury is meant to be her solution to the problem posed in the second Stasimon. Now, the second Stasimon has 4 strophic pairs. The whole thing runs from 490 to 565. It's relatively short. In the first system, the first strophe suggests that if Orestes gets off, everyone will feel free to kill parents. And if this is possible, then anything goes. The antistrophe says the real curse will be that when no one fears us, when there's no guilt, everyone will always fear everybody else. Without guilt, human beings are barbaric. Civilized life is impossible. The second system, the strophe, says, no father or mother can call for justice, can call for the Furies, can call on the Furies any longer. The antistrophe says, that shows you that awe, terror is good at times. It's an interesting word, todenon. It'll be crucial when we get to Antigone. So it's an odd word because in one way it means what's awful, what's awesome, what's uncanny, you could say. And in another way, it can mean clever, artful, canny. So it's a word that means both canny on the one hand and uncanny on the other, somehow combined in a way that's not supposed to be utterly unintelligible. We'll come back to this, but for now, they seem to be using it primarily in the sense of terrifying, awful, uncanny. And yet, it turns out that they're making a case for the terrifying, the awful, the uncanny being good. You need it because civilization is impossible without it, because if people aren't afraid in this way, then they'll do whatever pops into their head. So it's also clever. You need something, in other words, to back up the law. Third strophic system, the strophe tells us that therefore there's a mean is necessary between anarchy on the one hand and despotism on the other hand. You could say between utter freedom and utter necessity, between Apollo in the room, turning us all into perennial children, or Apollo completely outside the room, in which case there's nothing to be afraid of at all, and we're essentially perennial children. So the strophe tells us that this mean between anarchy and despotism is necessary. Health of mind involves ruling yourself by way of fear of us. And so in the antistrophe, let's read it on 241, we get this. In all things I tell you, must you reverence, feel shame before the altar of justice. Dishonor it not at a glimpse of profit, kicking it with impious foot, for a penalty shall be exacted. Feel shame. Fourth system, the strophe tells us, doing the just freely is happiness. And the antistrophe tells us, if you don't do it freely, you will of necessity suffer, although as usual, punishment is indicated in a long, the punishment you will suffer is indicated in a long, in this case, a sailing metaphor. So the second Stasimon summarizes what the Furies have learned so far. Terror is good to sit in watch over the mind, but it can't become tyrannical. Complete enslavement makes you miserable. Complete anarchy leads to destruction, which makes you miserable. Terror has to be softened so that it is possible to feel, to be just without compulsion. This leads into the third episode, the trial. First, Athena comes back. She makes it clear that this is an excuse for establishing jury trial, she says, line 571, for all time. Now, Apollo, you notice, comes in both as a witness and as an advocate, 576, 579. Athena lays out the proper order of a trial. The accuser, the punisher, the prosecutor goes first to establish what's at stake. So look at 245 at the top. Literally, the mythos, the story, the myth, the word is yours, for I bring on the case, the decane. For the prosecutor, I mentioned this to you last time, the word literally here is diokon, and it means prosecutor, but it also comes from the verb that means to chase, to pursue. The pursuer should first tell all from the beginning and should rightly explain the matter. Then the Furies examine Orestes. They seem to have a very coherent argument. You, Orestes, and she, Clytemnestra, both killed, but she's paid for it and you haven't. And you killed someone of your own blood, literally a same blood, and she didn't. So we pursue you. Orestes then essentially gives up and turns to Apollo. And in establishing his credentials, Apollo makes it clear that he always, on 247 now, he always speaks for Zeus. I bid you understand how mighty is this just plea and comply with the design of my father, for an oath has not greater power than Zeus. Which means I speak for Zeus here as well. And therefore, everything he says is an implied threat. Now, he's specifically, we get on 247, I'm sorry, I reversed the order. Never have I spoken on any mantic throne words touching a man or a woman or a city which had not been ordained me by Zeus, father of the Olympians. I bid you understand how mighty is this just plea and comply with the design of my father, for an oath has not greater power than Zeus. He specifically suggests that they should worry more about Zeus than about the oaths that they have taken to Athena. So what's his defense of Orestes? Agamemnon was a king. He was a great man. He was killed by a woman in a womanly way. the Furies reply with an account of how Zeus himself bound Cronos in the same womanly way that Clytemnestra bound Agamemnon. Now, Apollo then starts to ridicule them, but he remembers that, of course, Zeus didn't kill Cronos, and so changes a bit and says, but death is final for mortals and can't be undone even by Zeus. Now, this is especially interesting in Apollo's mouth. Apollo had a son, Aeschylus, the god of medicine. Aeschylus was killed by Zeus's thunderbolt for bringing the dead back to life. Apollo, in anger, takes vengeance by killing the Cyclops, the son of Poseidon, and Zeus banishes him from Olympus for 9 years, during which time he tends the flocks of a man named Admetus and ultimately devises a way for Admetus to avoid death if he can get someone to die for him. Euripides wrote a tragedy about it called Alcestis. That's Admetus' wife who finally agrees to die for him. Now, all of these episodes are called, I'm not simply importing them. If you look on 255, it's clear that we're meant to think of them because the chorus at one point say, such were your actions in the house of fairies also. You persuaded the fates to make mortals not liable to die. They're in a way pointing to the whole affair that got Apollo in so much trouble. In any event, when he says death is final for mortals, the Furies reply that this is precisely why they pursue Orestes, the finality of death. He killed Clytemnestra, and there's no possible restoration of her blood, at which point Apollo's reply is interesting. So look on page 249, bottom of the page. This too I will tell you, mark the truth of what I say. She who is called the child's mother is not its begetter, but the nurse of the newly sown conception. The begetter is the male, and she is a stranger, for a stranger preserves the offspring, if no god blights its birth. And I shall offer you proof of what I say. There can be a father without a mother near at hand. Is the witness the child of Olympian Zeus? And then a lacuna. And she was not nurtured in the darkness of the womb, but is such an offspring as no goddess might bear. And for my part, Pallas, in other things, I will do all I can to make your city and your people great. And so this is the bribe. So Apollo replies by saying that the mother isn't really a parent. We wonder about who bore the daughters of the night. We're never told of a father. Now, this strange argument about the non-blood tie between mother and child doesn't actually in any way undermine the previous argument. Clytemnestra still can't be restored to life. So shouldn't Orestes pay for the murder as murder, even if not as matricide? Underneath all of this, the serious argument is a threat. If Zeus wants, he can cancel the Furies altogether by eliminating women. And Athena is the proof. Apollo then turns to Athena and offers her and the Jories a bribe. So on the whole, you could say, you look at this passage, and the Furies, for all of their craziness, seem to present a much, much stronger argument than Apollo. Okay, what happens now? Athena instructs the jury. It starts at 681. Hear now my Thesmon, my ordinance, people of Attica, you who are judging your first trial for the shedding of blood. In future time also there shall remain for the people of Aegeus forever this council of judges. And this hill of Ares where the Amazons had their seat and pitched their tents when they came in hatred of Theseus with an army, and over against the city raised this new city with high walls. So they sacrificed to Ares, thus giving a name to the rock and the hill of Ares. In this place shall the awe, the sebas, of the citizens and their inborn fear restrain injustice, both by day and night alike. So long as the citizens themselves do not pervert the laws by means of evil influxes, for by polluting clear water with mud you will never find good drinking. Neither anarchy nor tyranny shall the citizens defend and respect if they follow my counsel. And they shall not cast out altogether from the city what is to be feared. For who among mortals that fears nothing is just? Such is the object of awe that you must justly dread. And so you shall have a bulwark of the land and a protector of the city, such as none of humankind possesses. Neither among the Scythians nor in the domains of Pelops, the Peloponnesus where Argos is, proof against thoughts of profit is this counsel, august, quick to anger, wakeful on behalf of sleepers, is the guard post of the land that I establish. This long exhortation I have addressed to my citizens to heed in time to come. But you must rise and take your ballots and decide the decane, the case, the justice, in reverence for your oath. My speech is ended. So first she erases the old myth that the Areopagus was named because of the trial of Ares. So she does something sort of akin to what the Prophetus does at the beginning. She makes it look as though she in a way talks away the competition. She says rather that this hill is named the Areopagus because it was there on this hill that the Amazon sacrificed before they attacked Athens. So once again, the women are erased. She says reverence, sebas, awe, fear, and not doing injustice to kin will hold day and night here, whether observed or unobserved. This purity, in other words, the purity of law, is not to be defiled. So law emerges as the mean between anarchy and despotism. Law is despotic in the sense that it necessitates, but you're necessitating yourself, and therefore it is free in the sense of being voluntary. Notice how completely here she echoes the Furies in the second Stasimon about the necessity of fear and about the necessity of a mean between despotism and anarchy. So don't throw out the Danon entirely. Let the Furies in. Don't take bribes, but let fear in. Now, the next section is crucial. We're going to come back to it next time. But a couple of things. You get 11 speeches here, followed by Athena's decision to vote for Orestes. So if you agree that there are 11 jurors, and I'll show you why you should in a moment, we get some hint of why the individual jurors may have voted as they did. So if you look at the passages, but mark well, our company might prove grievous for your land. I advise you in no way to dishonor. That's the Furies. They're appealing to fear. And I bid you respect my oracles and those of Zeus, and do not make them fruitless. That's, again, Apollo, meaning to make them afraid. You concern yourself with deeds of blood, though they are not your portion. No longer shall the oracles that you dispense be pure. Fear again. Was my father too mistaken in his purposes when Ixion, he was the first to kill, made supplication? You say it, if I do not get justice, I will address to this land in time to come. I will address a heavy weight to this land in time to come. But among the young gods and the older, you are without honor. The victory shall be mine. Such were your actions in the house of Pheres. Also, you persuaded the fates to make mortals not liable to die. Then it is not just to do a kindness to him who treats one with respect or reverence or awe, especially in his hour of need. It was you who violated the ancient dispensations, and with wine beguiled the old goddesses. It is you who shall soon, not having an end of justice, and shall spew out your venom with no harm to your enemies. Since your youth is riding down my venerable age, I wait to hear justice given in this case, being still in doubt whether to visit my anger on the city. Now, you can go through them yourselves. So what have we got? The jury just went out. While they're out, there's an exchange between Apollo and the Furies. There are 11 speeches. Go through them yourselves. It turns out that I think at least 6 of them invoke a kind of fear. They're threats. Now, that doesn't mean that these are the motives for why the jurors voted the way they did. But if they are, if this is an Aeschylean way of speculating about why they voted as they voted, since you can't do it any other way, they can't talk because they're 2 actors. There are 3 actors and the chorus. That's all you get, right? So they can't talk. So this is a way of raising the possibility that the vote was 6. It turns out to be 6-5 on my account, and the 6 who voted the way they voted not because they listened to the argument, but because they were afraid. So their reasons aren't very good. So what have we got? The trial isn't fair. In what we have, the Furies seem to make the better case. If the 11 speeches from 711 through 33 are running parallel to the jurors' motives for voting as they voted, then the last speech suggests that the Furies at least potentially support the system they have agreed to here. So the question is, why does Athena vote to make it a tie? I'm going to read the passage where she does that to show you that, in fact, she does do it. Here, it's on page 256. Before they count the votes, right after you get these 11 exchanges, Athena says, "It is now my deed, lastly, to judge justice," or to pick out justice. Same verb is used down below to describe what the jurors do. It is now my deed. She's just, they throw their pebbles in the pot, and she says after they're done, "It's now my task, my deed, last, to judge justice, and I shall give my vote to Orestes, for there's no mother who bore me, and I approve the male in all things short of accepting marriage, with all my heart, and I belong altogether to my Father. Therefore I shall not give greater weight to the moron, the fate of a woman, one who slew her husband, the watcher of the house. Orestes is the winner, even should the votes be equal. Now, what that means is Orestes is the winner, even if the votes picked out be equal, that, or the judged votes be equal. In other words, they have voted, but they haven't counted yet. Athena says, by the way, I am going to vote for Orestes. She didn't do that before they voted, so she didn't influence them by voting the way she voted. And then she says, and by the way, if it turns out to be a tie, which it could now be, since now there are 12 votes, well, previously there were only 11, if it turns out to be a tie, he's acquitted, because you need a majority of votes to claim that he did it. His innocence is presumed unless you can get the majority to vote against him. So the question is this: why is it important that the very first jury trial end evenly divided, even at the expense of allowing the weaker side to prevail? It's perfectly clear that Apollo's argument is really lousy. So is it worth it just to establish the principle that an even division means innocence? Is that the point of this whole affair? Now, I'm going to leave it there. I think, we have one more day on it. We have a bunch of questions sort of hanging, some of them old, some of them we've seen before, some are new. But that's, I think, there are two big things that will happen in the rest of, that we'll have to think about in the rest of the play. We have to ask, and we've been asking this from the beginning in different ways, if this is a play about establishing trial by jury as the best possible alternative for a system of justice, then why are we subjected to such a terrible example of a trial where it looks as though nobody thinks about what they should be thinking about in a trial? So why is that what's going on? First question. Second question, we didn't talk about much today. We'll talk about almost nothing other than that next Monday, is what does it mean that, you could see, in a way, the play could end here, more or less. Wrap it up in certain ways. But we have a lot of lines left. Where are we? Line 7-somethings, high 700s. We have another 300 lines to go before we end the play, and those 300 lines are almost exclusively concerned with the question of what it will take to get the Furies to not to take their wrath out on Athens and to actually remain in the city and take a part in this system of justice. So it looks as though we've got, what Athena knows is that the justice system that she has established by line 779 isn't any good. That it needs something else, and what it needs is the presence of the Furies, and we don't quite understand yet what that exactly means. So we need to know, we need to be asking why the trial was such a bad trial, why it was necessary for it to end in a tie. You obviously increase the possibility of that. You sort of establish the possibility of that by putting an even number of jurors on the jury. And Athena does that effectively at the end by saying, I'm throwing my pebble in as well, and it's a vote for Orestes. So you learn two things by that. Since she did publicly what they did privately, you learn that if she hadn't done that, he would have been convicted. And then she says the principle is that the tie always goes to the defendant. So we know we know things that we wouldn't ordinarily know in a jury trial. We know that they thought he was guilty. Because of the threats, despite the threats, who knows? But in the end, the human jury found him guilty. We know that. And we know that Athena forced it to be a situation where he got off, but he got off by the narrowest of possible margins. So why is that important? Number one question. Number two question, what does it mean that having done what she did, establishing this system, she now makes it clear that everything's going to fall apart unless she can convince them to make their home permanently in Athens, namely take up a place which everything we've talked about makes it look as though they can't do and be what they are. To turn the Furies into Eumenides means what? To honor guilt. I mean, in a way, that's what the Furies said they had to do, right? That you have to realize, they said, and then Athena just parroted them, that civilization is impossible unless you're terrified of what will happen if you do something bad, but not so terrified that you feel as though you're being enslaved. You have to in some way terrify yourself without a situation in which you terrify yourself. You see how, I'm going to stop now really, but you see how, remember last time I told you we did the shaking hands example, and I remarked to you how Greek tragedy has as its goal to re-barbarize us in thought so that we can think back to what gave rise to these original institutions and somehow reinvigorate them, because we don't just treat them as though they're passing things that we happen to follow. Well, in a certain way, what these goddesses have been screaming at us for the last couple of hundred lines is, we know you don't like to be afraid, you don't like to feel uneasy, you don't like to feel guilt, but you're lesser beings if you don't. You think you just want to be happy, and you think that everybody could live together and be nice, and so on and so forth. And it looks as though they're telling us, not only is that impossible, it's not good. There's something about it that diminishes you. In a certain way, you could say, I suppose you could say, the exhilaration that comes when you think that you've done something really freely, exhilaration in your own freedom, that doesn't actually happen in a world where everything is perfectly easy and comes, without taxing you and without fear and without, I hate to use this expression because I will call down the wrath of heaven for using it, but you need to think really seriously about safe spaces and whether safety is everything it's cracked up to be, because that's what they've been screaming at, right, for the entirety of the play. Be careful of safety. It's not, I mean, if, you somehow must have known that when you signed up for a philosophy course called The Philosophy of Tragedy. The fact is that what tragedy constantly confronts you with is what's awful. It can't be safe. It's got to put you on edge. It's got to make you feel as though everything's at stake and you don't know what's going to happen to you. So now what we've got is Aeschylus reflecting on, we see the very most practical level. It looks as though he's saying, look, unless people are afraid of the consequences, they're not going to obey the law. They don't obey the law, they won't be able to live with one another, and then civilization will perish. But it looks as though that might be true, but it's also a little shallow. It's not what he's really getting at. Underneath it all, he's in a way not talking about so much about the legal system as about what's so important about tragedy and the experience of tragedy, the sense that's weird. If it turns out that what Athena's plan involves is pulling guilt into the city and giving it a place of honor, isn't it a little bit about like having tragic festivals regularly scheduled, where you see you're forced to look at stories where sons kill their mothers, and you have to sort of figure out, and on the one hand you find them beautiful and attractive and deep, and you're drawn to them. On the other hand, it's really horrible. It's really horrible. It is Denos, awful, and also Denos clever. Putting these things together, that's somehow what tragedy does to us, what it's all about. And Aeschylus is defending it. He wants you to see that's really good. That's in a way the good thing for human beings. Now, that doesn't mean it's true, but by now we ought to know how serious he is. We know that it's not to be simply dismissed either. So we need to look very carefully at the end of the play and try to figure out what it means that these awful things that everyone avoids and thinks of as horrible are to be given a permanent place within civilization, a place of honor. We need to figure out what that means. Yeah, and not, as far as we know, the Shakespearean version where they were played frequently by young men whose voices, these are just men. There's even some question, although we have conflicting sources. Some suggest, so that, these tragedies were played before audiences of about 30,000. And there are places where it looks as though it was exclusively a male audience, but there's specific, in Plato's Gorgias, for example, and I think in the Symposium as well, where Socrates talks about having just the previous night seen Agathon, the tragedy for which Agathon won the prize, before an audience of 30,000 Greeks, and I think he mentions male and female. So it's hard. I think that the brunt of the evidence is that women did go to tragedies, but there's some disagreement about it. It's remarkable what we don't know.